January 22 is not just another date on the calendar. From this moment until January 31, something shifts in the spirit that most people never notice, but it affects everyone. I want you to listen carefully because what I'm about to share is not theory, not motivation, and not religious noise. This is lived truth. This is something I learned the hard way through darkness, through exposure, and through deliverance. And it all comes down to one word that, when spoken with understanding, cancels witchcraft curses that have followed people for years. I used to believe curses were complicated. I was taught they required rituals, objects, bloodlines, timing, and access points. And yes, those things exist. But what shocked me most was discovering how fragile witchcraft really is. When it comes into contact with divine authority, the enemy survives on fear, silence, and agreement. Remove agreement, and the system collapses. Between January 22 and January 31, many people experience unexplained pressure, sleep disturbances, sudden memories, emotional heaviness, old patterns trying to reassert themselves. That's not random. This is a spiritual threshold period. Old covenants look for renewal. Old assignments look for permission to continue. And most people unknowingly give it by their words. Words are not just sounds. Words are legal documents in the spiritual realm. Every curse operates through language, spoken, written, or silently agreed with. Witchcraft doesn't need your belief, it needs your consent. And consent often comes through what you say about yourself. I remember the first time I saw a curse break instantly, not gradually, not emotionally, instantly. It wasn't during a long prayer. It wasn't during a dramatic deliverance session. It happened when a woman, shaking and exhausted, whispered one word with tears in her eyes, not as a ritual, but as a surrender, and everything holding her, life hostage, lost its grip. That word was not shouted. It wasn't dramatic. But it carried authority because it aligned her with heaven instead of trauma. From January 22 onward, the spiritual atmosphere exposes agreements. This is why patterns resurface. This is why people suddenly feel like giving up, isolating, or returning to old habits. The enemy doesn't need to attack what already belongs to him. He only fights for what he's losing. Many curses stay active not because they are powerful, but because they are uncontested. Let me say that again. Many curses stay active not because they are strong, but because no one ever challenged them. Witchcraft feeds on repetition, generational repetition, emotional repetition, verbal repetition. This always happens to me. No one in my family ever succeeds. I'll probably fail again. Those sentences are not harmless. They are renewals. They are signatures. Between January 22 and January 31, words weigh more than people realize. This is a spiritual audit period. What you say either cancels or confirms what has been following you. I used to participate in rituals where the goal was not to overpower a person, but to wait for them to speak against themselves. Once they did, access was granted, no force required. That's why the enemy studies trauma. Trauma teaches people to curse themselves fluently. But here's what changed everything. There is one word that breaks agreement entirely, one word that removes legal rights instantly, one word that witchcraft cannot argue with, reinterpret, or delay. It is not a magic word, it is a position. This word shifts ownership. It transfers authority. It shuts doors that were opened emotionally, verbally, or generationally. And the reason it works is because it is recognized in both realms, light and darkness. When this word is spoken sincerely, every altar built on your pain loses jurisdiction. Every curse spoken over your name loses authorization. Every spirit assigned to monitor you is forced to disengage. This is why people who discover this word often experience resistance before breakthrough. Nightmares intensify, distractions increase, voices get louder because the enemy knows time is short. January 22 marks the beginning of confrontation. January 31st marks closure if you choose it. But here's the danger. Many people hear truth and still don't apply it because applying it requires responsibility. It means you can no longer blame your past while protecting your patterns. This word does not work if you want freedom without ownership. I've seen people pray all night and stay bound because they never withdrew agreement. And I've seen people say one word once and never struggle the same way again. Witchcraft cannot survive where authority is reclaimed. The reason this word cancels curses is because it declares alignment. Curses operate through alignment, alignment with fear, shame, bitterness, and identity distortion. This word severs that alignment. It says, I am no longer available. And the spirit world takes that seriously. Between January 22nd and January 31, many people are being given one last chance to speak correctly before cycles attempt to repeat. This is not about perfection, it's about position. If you don't choose your words, your wounds will choose for you. In the next part, I will reveal this word clearly, not as a slogan, but as a key. I will explain how to speak it, when to speak it, and why timing matters. Because saying the right word at the wrong position produces frustration, but saying it from authority produces silence in the spirit realm. This is not hype. This is not fear based. This is exposure. And exposure is the beginning of freedom. Stay alert. What you say between now and January 31 matters more than you've been told. Before I tell you the word, you need to understand why it works. Because power without understanding leads people to misuse. Truth and misuse creates disappointment. This is not a superstition. This is not positive thinking. This is spiritual law. Witchcraft only functions where there is permission. Permission can be inherited, spoken, or emotionally maintained. Most people think curses come from what someone else did to them. In reality, curses survive because of what the person keeps agreeing with after the event is over. This is why time does not automatically heal spiritual wounds. Time only hides them between January 22 and January 31. The spirit realm listens more closely than usual, not because the days are mystical, but because cycles are closing. When cycles close, all unresolved agreements demand renewal or termination. Silence counts as renewal. This is why doing nothing is never neutral. I learned this watching people who desperately wanted freedom but refused responsibility for their own authority. They wanted someone else to pray, someone else to fight, someone else to speak. But witchcraft doesn't respond to spectators, it responds to legal voices. You are a legal voice over your own life. That's why this one word works only when you say it, not whispered in fear, not repeated mechanically, but spoken from a decision. Here's what most people don't realize: every curse is a conversation. Someone spoke something, someone agreed, something enforced it. To break it, the conversation must be interrupted by a high care authority. That authority is not volume, it's position. The word I'm talking about is no. Not an emotional no, not an angry no, but a legal no. A no that withdraws permission. When spoken correctly, no is not resistance, it is revocation. Darkness does not need to be defeated when it no longer has access. I've seen people fast, cry, beg, and plead, but never say no. Begging keeps you beneath what's attacking you. Pleading assumes weakness, but no assumes authority. This is why the enemy tries to keep people exhausted, distracted, and emotionally flooded. Because tired people don't revoke agreements, they tolerate them. When you say no from authority, you are not asking for freedom. You are declaring jurisdiction, and witchcraft understands jurisdiction. But here's where people go wrong. They say no to the symptom instead of the agreement. They say no to fear, no to poverty, no to sickness, but never no to the identity that accepted those things as normal. This is why the word must be spoken with clarity between January 22nd and January 31. Saying no requires you to be specific. No to inherited patterns, no to familiar failure, no to repeating emotional cycles, no to self cursing language, no to trauma based identity. This is not denial, this is severance. I remember watching someone say no and immediately feel lighter, not emotionally, but spiritually. Their posture changed. Their breathing changed because something that had been sitting on there, lift, he lost its seat. Spirit sit where permission exists. The enemy doesn't need your attention, he needs your allowance. And allowance often sounds like this is just how my life is. That sentence alone has renewed more curses than rituals ever did. When you say no, you are not fighting the past. You are canceling its future. That's why timing matters. January 22 begins the window where unresolved permissions attempt to carry forward. January 31 is the seal. What is not cancelled is assumed to be accepted. This is why people who don't consciously choose often repeat. But saying no is not a one time emotional outburst, it's a positional statement. It must be followed by consistency in speech. You cannot say no in prayer and say, "This always happens to me in conversation." That's contradiction, and contradiction reopens doors. Witchcraft thrives on mixed signals. Clarity shuts it down. When you say no, you are telling the spiritual realm, this line ends here. You're announcing the termination of access. But here's the most important part. No must be said before manifestation, not after damage. Authority works best at the door, not after intrusion. This is why awareness is everything. Between now and January 31, pay attention to what tries to re enter emotionally. Old thoughts, old temptations, old narratives. That's not coincidence, that's negotiation, and every negotiation ends when you say no. Not loudly, not dramatically, but decisively. No explainio, NS, no arguments, no emotional debate, just no. Because explanations invite discussion and discussion gives ground. Witchcraft hates finality and no is final. In the next part, I will show you how to anchor this word so it doesn't fade under pressure, how to say it in a way that seals doors permanently, and how to recognize when the enemy tries to repackage the same curse in a different form. Because freedom is not just breaking curses, it's recognizing them when they try to return wearing a new face. Now, listen carefully because this is where many people lose ground after gaining understanding. Saying no is powerful, but authority must be anchored, or pressure will try to erode it. Freedom is not stolen back by force, it is surrendered through inconsistency. Witchcraft does not always return the same way it left. Sometimes it comes quietly, sometimes it comes reasonable, sometimes it comes disguised as familiarity. That's why people say, I thought I dealt with this already. You did, but the enemy came back to check whether your no was permanent or emotional. Authority that lasts is authority that is maintained. This is why after January 31, some people move forward cleanly while others feel confused. It's not because the word failed, it's because the position was abandoned. No must be spoken from identity, not from effort. Effort says I'm trying to be free. Identity says this no reflects who I am now. When identity shifts, maintenance becomes nature. Well, let me explain it this way. Witchcraft assigns labels before it assigns outcomes. If it can convince you of an identity, victim, failure, rejected, unlucky, it no longer needs to attack you. You will police yourself. That's why the most dangerous curses are not external rituals, but internal narratives. Between January 22nd and January 31, many people feel exposed because false identities are being challenged. The discomfort is not attack, it's separation. Something that lived close to you is being evicted. Evictions are never quiet, but here is how you seal it. After you say no, you must watch what tries to replace it, because empty spaces are contested spaces. If you remove permission but don't establish truth, something will attempt to reoccupy the ground. This is where most people fail, not in resistance, but in replacement. When you say no to the old, you must also say yes to what is true, not emotionally, verbally. Yes, I am free to choose differently. Yes, this pattern ends with me. Yes, my future is not obligated to my past. Yes, I belong to truth, not trauma. These are not affirmations. They are declarations of jurisdiction. Witchcraft cannot argue with declared truth. It can only wait for contradiction. That's why consistency matters more than intensity. People who shout once and then speak carelessly afterward reopen doors they thought were sealed. You don't need to monitor your life obsessively, but you do need to respect your words because stewards build atmospheres. After January 31st, whatever atmosphere you've built with your speech becomes your operating environment. Peace or pressure, clarity or confusion, authority or tolerance. This is why I tell people watch how you talk about yourself when no one is correcting you. That's where true alignment shows. The enemy does not need to scare you, he only needs you to slip back into old language. Old language renews old contracts. But here's the good news. Once you understand this, you stop being afraid of witchcraft entirely because fear is the language of inferiority. Authority doesn't panic. Authority observes, decides, and speaks. If something tries to reappear after you've said no, don't analyze it emotionally, don't ask why, don't relive the past. Simply restate your position. Know that no still stands. That's it. No drama, no fear, no explanation. Finality is exhausting for the enemy. I've seen people maintain freedom simply by refusing to renegotiate what they already settled. The enemy hates settled people because settled people don't argue with shadows. Between January 22nd and January 31, you were given awareness. Awareness is a gift, but responsibility follows it. You now know that curses don't survive power, they survive permission. You now know that one word spoken correctly cancels years of spiritual interference. And you now know that maintaining freedom is not about fighting harder, it's about speaking cleaner. Let me say something important. If you feel resistance as you listen to this, that is confirmation, not condemnation. Resistance means something is losing space. Truth always provokes what depends on lies. So don't rush. Don't force anything. But do decide. Decide what you will tolerate. Decide what you will speak. Decide what ends with you. Because once you decide, heaven aligns. And when heaven aligns, witchcraft has nowhere to stand. This is not about dates controlling you. This is about you recognizing moments of opportunity. January 22 to January 31 was a window, but authority doesn't expire when truth is established. What you've learned here applies every day going forward. But for those who heard this at the right time, this was not coincidence. You were meant to hear this now because you are meant to close something now. So speak wisely, stand firmly, and remember a curse cannot stay where permission has been revoked. And your no when spoken from truth is